want you to say action.
Action.
Wow, so creative.
People will say,
تعال يا فندم.
Stick it in my backpack. The big one. Yeah. Anywhere's fine. Can you make sure you're doing exactly that when they're filming?
Just bear with us for 5 minutes.
You've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
We're literally starting in 2
Yeah, you can start. It's fine.
we will start.
You start. We have to shoot the work.
Focus, Claire, focus!
You have to shoot the work.
Shine.
I hate doing it. I hate moves.
Claire,
Yeah.
can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Done.
That's fake, eh? Why? This is absolutely fake, isn't it?
We gotta record or something when the session is over. I just need the shot where Daniel is maybe. Yeah, we can see that the camera is not going on there. It's like, I mean, can we do it later? Get to work. And if it's really working, just work. And if you're not, just pretend. I know. المع اخوي اقعد بس تشتغل
يلا.
ورجينا غلطنا.
Hang on, gummy bears, gummy bears.
right there. Should we keep the banana since we are like in a co-op thing or something? I think it's relevant, no?
That's a clicker. Front, back. That's your mic.
All right.
Okay. If you want to position yourself already, we are good. We'll play the video so you can start.
Okay, that's good.
And
When you record this,
We're always standing here.
Can I try the clicker? Can I try the clicker?
people are going to be asking, when did you film this? And you're like, day 12. You're like, this isn't that clean.
Okay.
Yes. For? Good afternoon, everyone. our esteemed guest, thank you for coming today. We are here to present something very unique called Space Analytics and Solution Program. But before I started the real presentation, I wanted to start where did it become. So we have a massive of satellite data, which is the upper stream. And we do have a midstream, which is the R&D centers. And we do have the downstream, which is us, our end users, the government entities, the research and development centers, and the beneficiaries from these applications. So our government forecasting the future and foresighting this, as we do have the satellite data and how to turn them into an applications that solves different challenges that we have on Earth. So the UAE Space Agency established a program called Space Analytics and Solution Program that tackles the challenges over the Earth locally and internationally. And this program is towards the startups, the researchers, the scholars, and the scientists over the UAE. And there are different objectives of this program. One of them is to create a commercial viable applications utilizing only satellite data. And we do have the second objective is to promote this downstream applications and to increase the demand and the value of it, as well as the main objective is to solve the local and international challenges that we face on the ground and to promote the P partnership, which is the private-public partnership. Where we started focusing on three main themes, which is environmental monitoring, to focus on agriculture and water studies, as well as climate change, to map and monitor the greenhouse gases and the food security, to monitor the vegetation, health accuracy, mapping and studies, and to show you where are we from where we started. Today we have three main applications that is ongoing. The first one is awarded to Khalifa University, which is the environmental monitoring, to study and monitor the soil properties using the satellite data. The climate change, which was launched 2 days ago, and it's awarded to an Emirati startup called Farman, and it's basically to enhance and monitor the greenhouse gases emissions using satellite data. And the reason why we are here today is to launch the third application, which is the food security, and it was awarded to 4Earth Intelligence in support with the UAE Space Agency, and basically it is to establish a nationwide agriculture baseline advanced technologies, which is rely on the satellite data. So this baseline will rely on the satellite imagery to provide agriculture and intelligence reports. And to go deep on what is NABAT application, I will present a video that talks about the application itself. Then I will leave the floor to Jonathan Hendry from the 4Earth Intelligence, which is the Chief Technology Officer, to dive deep into application. And as I promised, I will leave the floor to Jonathan Hendry, the Chief Technology Officer from 4AI, to dive deep on the application and what are the objectives of it.
Thank you so much. So that video very quickly ran through the application itself. It showed how we can model climate change, how we can look at crop health, how we can look at irrigation, how we can look at all these complex problems. But I guess what we really want to say is what we're trying to use is the data that we have, but we want to create an application or a solution that is appropriate. It's much more about, we know what the problem is, let's solve the problem, rather than taking this solution we know we have and trying to find the problem. We know this is a problem. So that's what I want to focus on today in this discussion. And please do keep questions till the end. We do want this to be a discussion. And if there is any kind of guidance we can get from the amazing audience that we have out there, we really are keen for the discussion to continue. I wanted to start by just saying the first picture of the Earth was taken in 1946, so quite some time ago. But then this image, it took another 20 years before we had an image of the Earth. And this was extremely coarse. This included clouds. This included loads of problems that we have with data as a whole. And this problem of food security at that level was a challenge. It was kind of impossible to solve with the data that we had then. But since then, there's an abundance of data. And the challenge now, especially in food security and crop management, is translating the data into something useful, into a solution, into an application that anyone can access and use. So this image from 1966. I was reading a book. I was over in Qatar talking about water scarcity and water security. And at the time, I was reading through Sultan bin Sultan Al Saud. And on his way to the space station, he had a real reflection upon looking down at this Earth, seeing this image of our blue marble. He was the first Arab, he was the first Muslim, he was the first royal to ever travel, and at 28 he remains the youngest person ever to visit the space station. But as he looked with all of his American colleagues down at the blue marble, which has fueled the environmental movement that we now are at COP28 to be a part of, he started by saying, in the first few days, we looked at our countries and we pointed at our countries as we traveled away. And then in day 3 and 4, we looked at our continents and focused on our continents. By day 5, all we saw was one Earth. All we saw was one Earth that we need to manage together, that we need to develop policy for together. And that was my reflection when really looking upon our little blue marble. This is our one Earth to work towards together. But the kind of problems that we face in our one Earth, they are nation-specific. Different crops are suitable for different regions. And so we treat it as a national problem or a national kind of solution that needs to be created. But we can treat it as a international cooperation or collaboration. And I suppose that's the next steps that we really need to move towards within the security, food security kind of application. So we've tried to focus on this. And I think a really key take-home that I've got from this week is that the strategic piece does still need that work. There does still need to be that closer collaboration. And that's kind of how we look at this problem. We see this space-based data, and then we can move to planning. Then we can move to all of the applications and using all of that data that has been translated into a solution that we can all understand. And it's only then that we can actually move forward into that kind of collaboration to use those technologies and then evaluate how we can move forward, how we can, we can fight climate change together then. And that's really what we aim to do at 4AI. We use geo-artificial intelligence, we use computer vision. There's amazing transformative steps that have not just happened this year, even though we're now hearing about them, but over the last 10 years. And really what we want to do is translate that into the world of space, but translate that into the world of space for climate data. And then finally, we're a really passionate team who kind of have the motto of using spaced data for the benefit of humans and the planet. I'll move on. A key part of it has been the collaboration. And we've had some amazing partners. We've been really fortunate to work with in this project, and I mentioned just a few here. Ministry of Climate Change, the environment agencies. I won't go into all of them, but basically what I'm trying to summarize here is it has to be a collaboration. We always have to collaborate, and there has to be a unifying force, which in this case was the UAE Space Agency, which is fantastic to work alongside them for the past year. I guess we want to focus on the problem. We do want to know we want to recognize that there's a problem, and we have to give problem statements to be able to understand the limits. In the previous session, there was a discussion about increasing temperatures, and that's one of the key concerns, key problems within food security, because we have to look at irrigation requirements. Where are you getting the water from if the temperatures increase by, as that video showed, over specific farms? It will be specific. But for example, here in Dubai, we're going to see 60 degrees. We're going to see 60 degrees in the next few decades, and that's going to happen every year. We're going to see not 1 month of more than 40 degrees on these farms. We're going to see 3 months of more than 40 degrees on these farms. And there's kind of a massive irrigation piece, the evapotranspiration piece, just the health of the crops that we're able to focus on and the yield therein. So what we've aimed to do is pull together the science from specific crops, from specific irrigation, from drone data, pull it together with IoT sensors, so that's Internet of Things, that's just lots of hardware that's on the ground. We need to pull all of this together, pool our data to understand how to move forward, to be able to let farmers plan for how to move forward, and then give them up-to-date information, ideally in a cost-effective way. Like, that is a prohibitive factor in here. So we want to create this application to be really usable. We also have to focus on salinity. We have to then look at fertilizers, pesticides, uses alongside all of these kind of changing environments. And then we do have to look at population. It's not a surprising thing to say, I'm sure, but our population is increasing in the globe. It will hit a peak, it will decline. But there is still a management for decades that we're going to have to try and balance for this food security challenge that we face. I wanted to do a live demo, but I'll stick to the screenshots for now, and maybe we'll show the video later. But effectively, we want to be able to look at every farm that we have. We want to be able to map that in as high a resolution as possible. And I think I'll focus by saying space-based data, space assets. There's huge open source data sets that we can use here. And that data is repeatable, and it's becoming prolific. There's a huge abundance now of this open source data. But there's also an ever-increasing abundance, thanks, it should be said, to SpaceX launching these rockets, for just so many more satellites. When I started about a decade ago now, there were about 6 satellites that we used in this project. But for this project, we can actually look at about 700. There is this abundance of data. We can really monitor the Earth now. We can look at loss and damage. We can look at all of these other things from space data, but they have double uses. 10 times uses. Buy the data once, process it in many ways, use AI. And actually, we can transform it into, for example, what you're seeing on the screen here. There's so many acronyms in this sphere. But at the bottom there, you can see the vegetation health, for example, in these graphs. We can have a look at leaf area indices. But effectively, what this is saying is how healthy are our crops? How healthy are they now? How healthy were they 2 weeks ago, and 2 weeks ago, and 1 year ago, and 10 years ago? And then managing yield and productivity with all of that reach. And that's really what we've tried to focus on here. Linked to that, we can then look at all of the literature associated with specific crops. I won't go into too much detail now, but there's a wealth of research out there, as there should be, with something that's so important for us. But that's really where we want to get the balance. Again, irrigation, fertilizers, what do farmers need based on what has happened, the previous day when that image was collected, so that they can act immediately. They can be given immediate intelligence about their farms that they previously wouldn't have had. And then finally, we can also, at a macro scale, at a master planning level, look at what happens out to 2100. What does the yield for the entire nation mean? How can we feed that into our wider, our international view of food security? And so on the left there, you can kind of see all of the different crops, counts of each of them. And as the tech is advancing more and more, we can start identifying specific fruit trees or crops, etc., or we can use on-the-ground data, again, feeding into the application. there's a lot of data out there that is also not satellite, that we should be pulling in, we should be understanding, that we can work with local universities, national universities to pull out. And salinity is one of those key things. So very salty areas are not helpful for crops. It's kind of that simple. And that's what we need to do, is we say it's that simple, but we need to translate that information such that people can, again, they can action upon that information. So again, that's what we've tried to do here. And you can kind of focus on those green areas, those really dense areas of agriculture. But we can also then look at changes in salinity over years, or we can drill down into the weeks. So there's a lot there. Linked to this, I should say, UAE, and I keep pushing this, but UAE has khalifasat. It has many satellites that are launched by UAE companies that actually are completely free to government agencies. This data should be being used. It does cost millions of dollars. So it's really worth jumping into using this data. New data is collected every 6 months, so you can get a really clear picture in the highest resolution at kind of this 50 centimeter, 70 centimeter kind of scale. Whereas before, again, we're talking about pixel sizes, things that we're trying to identify for the size of this room. We can now look at the size of this desk. So there's technological advancements, there's that abundance of data, and then actually, there's the cost, which has just been drilled down to nothing in khalifasat data. So there's a real push there for government agencies to use this data and for that to be a real focus. Again, these missions are just becoming more frequent, and so there is a trend, and we can't really ignore that trend. So let's step into it. I mentioned looking wider. Our food security is not just about our own nation. It's not just about looking inward. It is also about looking at all of the nations that we work with, that we work from, that actually maybe land that we own, or land that we look after, land that we farm. And there's a huge amount of intelligence in the exact same way, the exact same methods that we can adopt. So the software here has pulled out surface temperature, so land surface temperature across sub-Saharan Africa. And actually we can do this every time this imagery is collected, again, every 2 weeks, or we can create averages over the year. We can look at trends internationally. We can look at trends geospatially. So there's a huge wealth of data, and again, that translation piece needs our attention. So the objectives, which we try to focus on, are kind of here. So the really key thing is we've used climate change science, which again has had a healthy amount of funding. And actually, we can translate that into something, again, that is usable on the ground. These conferences are fantastic for us to all put heads together, for actually academics to get together, for policymakers to get together, for frameworks to be pushed forward, but it does need that translation piece. So pulling together all of this research, combining it in the right way, we can attack food security. There is a challenge of sharing data. That's why we like the open source data. It should be said in UAE, we were fortunate enough not to encounter resistance to sharing of data. But internationally, that is kind of a different story, and I've heard that again and again in the last week. So there is a lack of sharing data. And then we love our buzzwords. So digital twins is one of these buzzwords that keeps cropping up. But for farms, what that really means is we need to understand in the highest res that we can. We want to understand at that crop level, at that farm level. Really, we should be trying to understand in 3D, so that yield component of individual crops within these farms, and translate that into something temporal. So we want a 4D model moving forward. So that's what our digital twin is really referring to there. And that's how we can understand then the actions that we need to take against that. And then finally, we had the privilege of working alongside younger Emiratis who have just graduated. They were brought in for the whole project. Absolutely brilliant individuals. And then we also had interns coming in for specific targeted training in kind of management, in technical roles, in administration as well. But again, trying to progress the skill base of all of these people in this nation. But again, that's something that's very easily translated. It can be used as a model, a framework in other nations as well. And this is how quickly this can be achieved, I will say. So in December, we kind of initiated this platform, this project. And by September, actually, we were able to launch. we were able to put forward that beta version. That's how quickly we can move at a national level when the data is presented. The science is already there, and it has been for years, it should be said. But it's that collaborative piece of pulling together all of this research, pulling together the data into something that can then be usable. Yeah, and so that leads us to today, I suppose, presenting at COP28, which has been a real pleasure. So right now, this is launched on GIQ. This is available for use on that marketplace. And again, it can be translated to other nations. I know the European Space Agency would be really open to having that conversation, working out how there can be that international collaboration. But actually, this platform's there for you. Again, easily logged into using UAE Pass if you're within the nation. Otherwise, I know there's other ways to access it. So we've tried to make that ease of use, that ease of navigation, the ease of access as simple as possible. Thank you so much. We will take, I think, 1 or 2 questions, if there are any. Question at that mic.
Yes, hi, my name is Richard from GemServe in the UK. I'm really interested about the data sets that you have from satellites. I mean, you've just concentrated on farming, but can you switch your technology to building information as well to look at how efficient certain types of developments are, properties, and then put suggestions for improvements into that?
Thank you so much. Brilliant question, and I'm so glad you've asked. It's a huge topic. Over here, the focus really is on air conditioning efficacy. In the UK, I know it's the exact reverse issue. And there's this process, which I am an absolute advocate for, which is called tip and queue. So that uses open source data, very light to use. It's not data heavy, very simple to understand. But it uses a very coarse resolution and says, right, where's our problem at this nationwide scale? Then let's zoom in. Let's use higher resolution, open source data. It's heavier, it's harder to use, but we'll focus on a smaller area. We've zoomed in. We now can have a look at the temperature over that location. We zoom in again. At this point, we do have to use either the commercially available data, that 50 centimeter, or in this case, khalifasat is there, but we can use that thermal data to understand individual buildings. There are satellites now that are going down to 50 centimeters. We can look at roofs and see the temperature of that roof. I'll say it, it's been used to focus on areas that are actually growing cannabis because the farms produce so much heat. So you can actually immediately isolate those locations. But it's also used for the insulation and monitoring insulation. What I guess I would say is these technologies are not mainstream yet. They are very close to being mainstream. We're working with various governments to focus exactly on that. So yeah, absolutely, it's a really key question, not just in farms, but in buildings as well. Any other questions?
Here. Hi, my name is Ramdan.
Hello.
I'm Ramdan. I work for the United Nations University. My question is related to how exactly you determine the impact of climate change on food insecurity or food security, and what food security or food insecurity indicator do you use precisely?
I'll try and keep the answer simple, but I'd love to speak afterwards to really dive into this. Effectively, producing food is kind of a function of, at the most oversimplified level, the health of the soil and or the fertilizers, pesticides used, the amount of water that you give to those crops, and choosing the appropriate crop relating to all of those other variables. We can also talk about heat stress as well, as kind of mentioned. Basically, what we're trying to do is create that digital twin to then forward look. So the key thing, I guess, is to say, we have so much information about what crops need. Across the world, there's amazing research. So when we understand the function, we can literally go, it's a function of the health of the soil, the health of the aquifer that it's in, or the irrigation and/or the irrigation. And then we can also have a look at the heat stress that plant can survive, et cetera, et cetera. But we turn it into that equation. Without going into detail, it's about 30 papers that you have to squish together to really understand it all, to create the model that then moves forwards. I can demo the platform, but basically that's where it's at. The complexity of the platform basically tries to simplify down that data to say the yield might go from 100 kilograms of alfalfa through to maybe 70 kilograms if the heat stress increases by 4 degrees. And that's really what we're aiming to do, because then you can create scenarios and you can say the cost of this pesticide fertilizer, irrigation would be this, therefore is it worth it? Should we move our farm to an area that's more naturally, it's got good groundwater, it's got good aquifers, it's got better soil types. We leave fallow ground, what's the net impact kind of economically? So there's this huge piece that we pull together. Final thing I would say is there's an economic piece, there's a financial piece that we also have to throw in the mix. And there's some really good standards, TNFD, that are kind of focused on that as well. More than happy to chat afterwards. Last question, thank you.
Thank you so much. I love it. I have a question. I'm called Vincent. I come from Uganda. I'm a founder of an organization that focuses on innovation and research for climate change. My question is, would you be willing, or do you have plans in the future to share your data across governments? So for example, in my country, while we might have data, or we may not have too much of the satellite data, so would you want to collaborate in terms of sharing the satellite data across governments besides UAE? Then additionally, you've talked about relying on the already available research to provide you with parameters that you would use to diagnose the health of systems. Would you be willing to partner with research organizations that don't necessarily use satellite data, but do the usual theoretical research on the ground? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Something that, again, it kind of kills me, but the sharing of data really is an issue. Everything I've shown there that was Africa is completely open source already. That data is out there. The really hard piece is the translation. So absolutely, that data is there to be shared. At the end, it showed a very quick download in that video. Right now, you can log in and download that data. There is nothing stopping you. And that's really what we need to push. So the sharing of data, absolutely. The key thing I will say is for the detailed application, the detailed kind of understanding of a specific farm, there has to be the level of information, that smaller resolution. We have to understand like individual crops, or at least clumps of crops, so the size of maybe this stage here. We can't use data that is the size of this room to understand that. And at the moment, there is a barrier there, because that is commercial data, that is expensive data. And what I will say is across Africa, Digital Earth Africa have done a fantastic job of democratizing that data, the real detail, the real heavy, but really good detail. And they've got it on their platform in the cloud, therefore it removes that barrier of, I can't handle terabytes of data. I showed a screen there and it had 6 terabytes of data from khalifasat. Most people can't handle that kind of data, it's heavy. And that platform is doing exactly what you've just said. It's trying to democratize data and the sharing therein. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of you attending.